It wasn't a missed deadline. It wasn't poor performance. It wasn't some glaring mistake in a pitch. It was the hoodie. The same black hoodie Jamal Carter had worn the day he helped land a six-figure client. The same hoodie he wore when he stayed late to clean up the department's presentation slides because no one else bothered. That hoodie, paired with a gold chain tucked under his collar and neatly tied locks that fell just past his shoulders, said everything about who he was, and apparently that was the problem. He didn't see it coming. The morning had started like any other. He sipped coffee from the corner cafe with the free Wi-Fi, the place where the barista knew his name and his order. The office elevator dinged its usual robotic chime, and Jamal stepped into the gray open workspace of hardened steel with earbuds around his neck and a calm mind ready to design. No complaints, no errors, no tension in the air. But by 2:30 p.m. he was sitting in a small HR office, listening to two people smile while telling him he didn't belong. The conversation was coded in professionalism, dipped in HR-approved language, and dressed in concern. Cultural fit, brand alignment, presentation to clients. The words danced around the truth like they were afraid to touch it. Gavin Steele, VP of Marketing, sat across from him with his blazer perfectly pressed and his fake concern rehearsed. Denise Harper, the HR manager, said little. Her hands were folded in her lap, her lips drawn in a tight line, her eyes darting from the report to the desk. Jamal sat still, listening, blinking once before asking, "So you're saying how I look doesn't work here?" Gavin gave a polite chuckle, the kind that people used when they wanted to sound understanding but not accountable. No, it's not about looks, Jamal. You're talented. But sometimes, image speaks before words do. And your style, it may be misunderstood, especially with clients. Jamal said nothing. He didn't need to. The message had landed. A week later, the decision was final. An email arrived just past 8 a.m. He read the subject line, "Notice of termination, effective immediately. No meeting, no goodbye." Just a note saying he wasn't the right fit. No mention of the campaigns he built, no acknowledgement of the revenue he helped bring in, just the silent erasure of his contribution. He boxed up his desk in silence. No one made eye contact. A few co-workers offered half smiles. One patted his shoulder with a weak, "Take care, bro." The energy in the office was familiar. This wasn't shock. It was a routine. Jamal walked to the elevator slowly. It was strange, how the place could look so polished and feel so hollow. The framed words on the wall caught his eye for the first time in weeks. "Diversity is our strength." He let out the smallest laugh. Empty slogans couldn't soften the blow of coded prejudice. Outside, the wind was sharp. The streets of downtown Chicago bustled like nothing had changed. But inside him, everything had. He didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, he took the train to the south side. His mother's house sat at the end of a quiet block, a modest place with chipped paint and warm memories. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't have to. Mrs. Thompson opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd known he was coming. Her salt and pepper hair was wrapped in a scarf, and her eyes, still as sharp as ever, scanned his face before she spoke. "They finally showed you what you were worth to them, didn't they?" Jamal nodded slowly. She stepped aside to let him in. "Come sit down, I made sweet tea." He sat at the kitchen table where the wood was scratched from years of life. Homework, spilled meals, folded bills. She placed a glass in front of him and sat across. "They didn't fire you for anything you did," she said. "They fired you for reminding them who you are." He stared into the tea for a moment. "They said I didn't represent the company well." Mrs. Thompson tilted her head. "And what exactly were you supposed to represent? Silence, discomfort in your own skin. A costume they liked better." Jamal looked up, and something cracked in his chest. Not loudly, but enough to release the ache he'd held since the meeting. The ache of knowing that no matter how hard he worked, how careful he was with his words, how clean his code or sharp his visuals, he would always be seen as a risk in places like that. He remembered being in college, sitting in a class where he was the only black student, being told by a professor that his design style was too urban. He remembered being 14 and told to remove his durag in a store because it was gang-related. He remembered being 5 years old and hearing a teacher tell his mom during parent-teacher night that he had attitude problems, just because he didn't smile on command. It wasn't just about the hoodie. It was never about the hoodie. It was about the fact that Jamal refused to check himself at the door, that he brought all of who he was, his voice, his culture, his fire, into rooms that only wanted the parts they could polish and put on display. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed in the old guest room, staring at the wall where his high school award still hung. The silence was thick, but his thoughts were louder. They didn't just let me go. They erased me, like I never mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from a former coworker. Just one sentence. "I wish I'd said something." He didn't reply, because silence after the fact wasn't bravery. It was guilt. By morning, something had changed. He didn't wake up with answers, but he did wake up with resolve. He walked back into his childhood room and pulled out an old sketch pad, flipping through logos he had drawn during college, brand concepts he never pitched, notes from late nights when he used to dream about starting something of his own. Maybe now was the time. Maybe getting fired wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something they never saw coming. The days after. The termination blurred together. Morning felt the same as night. The sun rose, but nothing inside Jamal moved with it. His body got out of bed. His hands went through the motions. But his mind stayed stuck in that HR room. The cold way they looked at him like a brand risk. Like a style problem. Like a silhouette they didn't know how to market. He stopped checking emails. He let job alerts stack up in his inbox like bills you pretend aren't there. The thought of walking into another corporate building, nodding politely, pretending to be grateful just to be seen, it made his chest heavy. He'd spent years adjusting the volume of his voice, softening the edges of his personality, watching his culture get copied in the campaigns he helped build, but never credited by name. He thought about all the times he'd held his tongue, like when a coworker made a joke about his chain being blingy, or when a manager asked if he could look a little cleaner before a client meeting, or the time he was asked to edit his own face out of a mock-up because the visuals need to appeal to a wider audience. He started to think the silence had cost him more than the job ever gave him. At home, the walls felt closer. He ate less. He stopped sketching. His mother watched him carefully, never asking too many questions. But one night after dinner, she spoke without looking up from her plate. "They took something from you," she said softly. "But don't let them keep it." Jamal didn't respond at first. He sat still, fork untouched. "I did everything right, Ma. I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, learned their lingo, learned their rules." She finally looked up. "You learned their rules, but you forgot your own." He stood up and walked to the sink, the weight of her words settling into his back like bricks. That night, instead of lying in bed, he opened his laptop. Not for job hunting, but for digging. He started reading articles about cultural bias in hiring, about the professionalism standards shaped around whiteness, about how black men were perceived as aggressive when confident or unpolished when authentic. He watched panel discussions, podcasts, interviews. He started to see that what happened to him wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a fluke. It was systemic, stitched into the seams of a society that didn't want change. It just wanted compliance. Indeed. One video, a speaker said, "The system was never broken, it was built this way." Those words hit like truth. He needed air. He took a walk through the old neighborhood. He passed a mural of Malcolm X that someone had recently restored. He passed a bookstore that now hosted weekly entrepreneur circles in the back room. And just as he turned to cross the street, he noticed a flyer taped to a lamppost. Black Entrepreneurs Meetup, Thursday at 7 p.m. Let's build what they won't give us. He almost kept walking, but something told him to stop. That Thursday he showed up, unsure what to expect. The room was packed. Not a corporate setup, Folding chairs, mismatched coffee mugs, and energy so thick it buzzed. A man stood at the front, mid-40s, wearing a plain tee and speaking like he didn't need to convince anyone. He introduced himself as Andre Simmons, a former tech executive turned community builder. Jamal listened. Really listened. Andre talked about losing his job at a Fortune 500 company because he challenged their hiring practices. He talked about walking away from the begging and the proving. And then he said something that stuck. Stop begging for a seat. Build your own table. After the talk, Jamal approached him. They spoke for over an hour. Andre didn't offer a business card or a pitch. He just said, when you're ready, start with what they said you weren't. Allowed to be. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. He stayed up drafting ideas, names, missions. He scribbled in notebooks, opened old files, remembered brands he once imagined but never pursued. He thought about all the creatives he had met. Brilliant minds overlooked because they didn't present well. He thought about the kid who interned at Heart and Steel and was told his natural hair looked too wild. He thought about his own work, raw, unapologetic, full of voice. He opened a blank document and typed 4 words at the top. Youth City. The culture we build. A name. A mission. A promise. In the weeks that followed, Jamal worked quietly but with purpose. He didn't have seed funding. He didn't have a fancy investor. But he had drive. He sold old equipment, cashed out a small savings account, and rented a tiny co-working space on the south side. The beginning was rough. People were skeptical. Some called it a passion project. A few friends from the old job offered polite encouragement but never shared his posts. One even told him, "It's a nice idea, but that space is already saturated." Jamal kept building. He reached out to photographers, designers, editors, black and brown creatives who had talent but no platform. He didn't ask for portfolios. He asked for stories. He offered what little he had and promised creative freedom in return. The team was small, 5 people at first, but they believed in the vision. They launched local campaigns for Black-owned coffee shops, nonprofits, and fashion brands. Their content was bold, unfiltered. They didn't sell polish, they sold pride, and it worked. Word spread, clients returned. Then came media attention. A write-up in a regional digital magazine called them a revolution in branding. Jamal read it with a quiet smile. It was working. Then one day, an email arrived. It was from a creative agency acting on behalf of a large client looking to refresh their identity. He clicked the attachment. Branding guidelines, sample files, demographic breakdowns, and a logo at the bottom, Heart and Steel. For a second, he didn't move. He stared at the screen, heart steady, not in shock, but in realization. They didn't know. They didn't realize that the company they were about to hire was built by the man they fired. Jamal closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled. This wasn't revenge. This was reckoning. The boardroom had always been a room of silence, not in sound, but in presence. The kind of silence where decisions were made before introductions, where glances were currency and power rarely changed hands. Jamal had sat in rooms like this before, once as a young intern clutching a notepad. He was never asked to open once as a junior designer, whose ideas were praised but never credited. This time, he was not here to impress. He was here to deliver. Othen City had grown in ways Jamal never imagined. What started as a side hustle had become a creative force with campaigns that pushed boundaries and celebrated voices rarely heard in branding. Bold, colorful, unapologetic. And now, by some twist of irony, the same company that once called him a poor fit had come knocking, desperate to stay relevant. He had accepted the pitch meeting without revealing his identity. The request had come through an intermediary agency, and he made no effort to correct the assumption. He wanted the work to speak first. His presence would come later. His team spent a week preparing the pitch. The energy was electric, sharp with purpose. They built a campaign grounded in authenticity, culture, and truth, wrapped in creativity, but rooted in pride. Every slide of the presentation spoke to what Jamal had once been told to hide. His team didn't soften the message. They leaned into it. On the day of the pitch, he wore the same gold chain, the same black hoodie layered beneath a clean blazer. His locks tied back with precision. No disguises, no shrinkage, just him. As they entered the room, the receptionist gestured toward the conference space with a bright corporate smile. Inside, the executives were already seated. Gavin Steele sat at the center of the long table, flipping through his notes. Denise Harper, now head of HR, sat 2 seats down, more confident now, but still composed. Jamal noticed how her eyes flickered when she saw him. Recognition, surprise, then something else. A flicker of respect. But it was Gavin's face that told the story. The moment Jamal stepped in, the color in Gavin's cheeks drained. His fingers froze mid-flip. His lips parted, like he might say something, but nothing came out. The room tilted just slightly in atmosphere, not visibly, but spiritually. He wasn't expecting to face a ghost from the file he helped erase. Jamal said nothing at first. He let the screen light up with their first slide. Authenicities. Logo in bold font followed by the campaign's title, "The Culture is the Brand." Then he spoke. His voice was calm, measured. Not loud, not urgent, just clear. Like someone who no longer needed to seek permission. This campaign is built around truth. The kind of truth that doesn't dilute itself to fit into a frame. We've designed a narrative that honors voices, instead of erasing them. We didn't simplify the message, we refined it. Because authenticity isn't a threat, it's the only currency that still holds value. The slides moved one by one. Images, messaging, street interviews, mock-ups of branded visuals that included real community faces. It wasn't sanitized. It was human. Raw in its honesty, but beautiful in its expression. Jamal didn't look at Gavin until the very end. Not until the final slide, which read in bold type, "If your brand can't handle real people, maybe it's not real." He closed the laptop. The silence in the room shifted again. This time not because of discomfort, but because the truth had landed. Gavin cleared his throat. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "you've certainly come a long way, Jamal." Jamal blinked slowly, then looked him in the eye. "I didn't come far," he said quietly. "I came home to myself." The words dropped like a weight. Denise turned her head slightly, hiding the smallest smile. One of the junior executives tapped a pen nervously on the table. Gavin straightened in his seat, attempting to regain control. "We appreciate the creative angle. It's bold. Definitely different from what we're used to. But that's why we called you in. Fresh perspective." Jamal nodded once. "That's good to hear." Gavin continued. "So let's talk next. Steps. Our internal review team will—" Jamal raised a hand gently. "There won't be next steps." Gavin blinked. "Excuse me?" Jamal stood calmly. "We won't be working with you." The room went still. Gavin leaned forward, visibly confused. "Is this a negotiation tactic? I think you're misreading the opportunity here." Jamal's voice remained steady. "I read it just fine. You didn't want my presence in your company, but now you want my ideas for your brand. That's not opportunity. That's convenience." One of the junior team members whispered something to a colleague, wide-eyed. Gavin shifted again, frustration, starting to creep in beneath his corporate cool. "This is business, Jamal. Let's not make it personal." Jamal smiled slightly. "It was personal the day you decided my appearance didn't fit your image. The day you took what I was and labeled liability. So let me be clear. I don't work with people who fear the truth behind my skin." The words echoed, not loud but unshakable. Denise nodded almost imperceptibly just once. She didn't speak, but her posture said everything. Jamal closed his laptop. His team followed suit, packing their materials quietly. There was no applause, no dramatic exit, just the sound of chairs shifting and a quiet kind of power settling over the room. As he walked out, he didn't feel angry. He felt light. Not because he had won, but because he had stopped playing their game. He hadn't sought revenge. He had offered truth. And when they couldn't receive it, he chose something stronger than compliance. He chose freedom. News of the boardroom moment didn't go viral overnight. It didn't need to. It traveled the way truth always does. Quietly at first, then like wildfire once people recognized themselves in it. A designer who once blended into the background had now stepped into the light on his own terms, and people were paying attention, not just to the campaign, but to the man behind it. Authon City wasn't just a rising creative agency anymore. It was a movement. Requests flooded their inbox. Interviews, podcasts, write-ups. Every media outlet wanted to feature the man who turned being fired into building an empire. But Jamal wasn't interested in buzz. He was focused on impact. He kept his team small, grounded, rooted. They met every Monday morning in the same co-working space, even though they could now afford something bigger. It reminded them who they were, where they started, why they did this. Jamal didn't just build campaigns now, he built platforms. He began speaking at high schools, walking into gymnasiums full of kids who wore their culture on their sleeves and were told daily to tone it down. He told them that their style, their slang, their story, it was all power. Not something to hide, but something to lead with. He launched an initiative for young black creatives trying to break into marketing, branding, and design. Most of them had talent. What they lacked was access. So Jamal built bridges, mentorship, training, real opportunities. He called it the Culture Lab, a space where their ideas didn't just get polished. They got amplified. And then came the scholarship. It started with a conversation over dinner with his mother. They were sitting at the kitchen table, same place where years ago she told him not to let anyone shrink his roots to make them comfortable. She poured tea into his cup, smiled gently, and said, "You've already helped so many. Now help the ones who haven't even found their voice yet." That night, he drafted the first letter for the Thompson Creative Fund, named after the woman who raised him to believe that dignity was never optional. The scholarship would support students from underserved neighborhoods who wanted to study design, entrepreneurship, or the arts. It was his way of making sure no kid with a dream had to sit in a classroom and feel erased. By the end of the year, the office had moved into a larger space. Not fancy, intentional. Exposed brick walls, local art on display, music playing low from Bluetooth speakers. At the front entrance, just above the reception desk, hung a framed photo of Jamal's mother in her Sunday best, eyes strong, smile proud. Beneath the photo, engraved in bronze, were her words, "Your roots are not baggage. They are power." On opening day, she walked through the doors slowly, eyes wide. Jamal guided her hand through the hallway, showing her every corner, every detail. She paused at the wall of framed campaign work, portraits of black, brown, and teal. Indigenous people featured proudly in nationwide branding campaigns. No filters, no facades. She turned to him, her voice soft. "This is what it looks like when you stop asking for a seat and start building your own house." He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into a hug. Things shifted across the city, quietly at first. But systems notice when someone builds an alternate path. Denise Harper had watched the changes unfold from the inside. After Jamal's departure from Heart and Steel, something in her had started to stir. She stayed for another year, watching the company cycle through rebrands and public apologies while doing little to change the core of its practices. She attended meetings where executives discussed reaching urban markets with language that made her skin crawl. Eventually, she submitted her resignation. She didn't leave because she was angry. She left because she was done being quiet. 6 months later, she walked into Authon City's office as its new chief people officer. When Jamal introduced her to the team, he didn't mention her past. He didn't need to. What mattered was who she chose to become now. Meanwhile, the man who once dismissed Jamal as a branding liability was quietly dismissed himself. Gavin Steele's pattern of unconscious bias, documented emails, overlooked promotions, questionable firings, finally caught up with him. The firm released a statement. He resigned to pursue other opportunities. But the city knew, the industry whispered, and Jamal. He moved forward without ever mentioning Gavin's name again, because this story was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving something far more important right. One afternoon, Jamal stood at a community event in the heart of Bronzeville. The sun was high, the music loud, the smell of food trucks winding through the air. Dozens of young creatives sat in folding chairs under a shaded tent, listening to speakers talk about purpose, design, and leadership. Jamal waited at the back, smiling as one of his mentees took the mic, a shy high schooler who once doubted she'd ever be heard. Now she was commanding a crowd, talking about her first campaign and how it taught her that her ideas mattered. A little boy walked up to Jamal, tugged his sleeve and said, "Are you the guy from the news?" Jamal knelt down. "Maybe, depends which story you heard." The boy grinned. "The one where you told the fancy people no," Jamal laughed. "Yeah, that one's true." The boy nodded like he understood something bigger than his age allowed. Then he ran off, joining his friends by the paint booth. Jamal looked around, taking it all in. The music, the laughter, the freedom. They tried to fire who he was, but all they did was light the fire under who he became.